the host of the game last night in the game last night, Cap, Olivia Christian, who's playing hurt today, battling through injuries, battling through a cold. But we're happy that you're here with us.
Everything. Theraflu fixes everything.
I've been throwing everything at it. Theraflu, Dayquil, Halls, Vicks, all of the things.
I just do a little crowd therapy and hope that it works.
I usually don't do nothing.
I don't know how long it's been years.
I got a pretty good immune system. I don't really get sick.
I do too. It's been years. I haven't been this sick. I don't remember how long it's been. I mean, 2018, I don't even remember. I haven't been sick since I've lived in LA, and that's 3.5 years. And then it just kind of started with the sore throat on Sunday night, and I was like, what was this? And then
that's gradually. The start. That's the start. If I feel my throat getting scratchy, it's like, oh no, come on, man.
Yeah.
Don't do this. Don't do this.
It was a mess. It was a mess. So I'm sorry. I usually lose my voice, which I lost it yesterday. And I was like, I don't know if I can do the show. But I dumped a bunch of drugs into my system to clear up the airways. It's a mess today.
We're sending Olivia to rehab immediately following the show. Did the Kings help you feel a little bit better last night?
That's the one thing, when you're sick and laying on the couch, you get to watch all of the games uninterrupted. And that was such a great game last night. It was just right on time. They had a couple of losses on the road. And when you start getting into that rhythm of being on the road and not being able to overcome some of these challenges, you can quickly fall into a rut. And I'm so glad that they got back to who they are, who they've been this season. They were active everywhere, running up and down the court. Even, a couple times when they were walking it up, Mike Brown's like, get after it, run. And like, oh yeah, let's do this. And they just played to their strengths. And so that was really fun to watch and to see them overcome that giant deficit that they allowed themselves to get under. But I have to say, that's a theme with the NBA these days. A lot of these games, like people go up by 20, they'll go up by 30. But if there's at least 2 quarters left, you've got a whole new game. You don't have to fall apart if you get down by a lot. If you just stick with it, stick with the game plan, play within yourselves, you can crawl out of that. And that's what the Kings did last night. So I'm very excited to see them rally.
You said something interesting there, getting back to who they are and their identity. In your opinion, what is this Kings team identity on the floor?
They are a running team. They can shoot the lights out. I think when we see them having difficulty is when they get stagnant. They start kind of watching each other, looking around the perimeter, hoping that Domas can make a move, can get to the free throw line, hoping for De'Aaron Fox to do his magic. But when they're all working together, they're all getting after it. They're moving and creating opportunities to rack up those assists, which means at least one other person has touched the ball per the possession, right? So like when they're able to do that, then they find a lot of success. And you can see, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, just the joy that they bring to the game when they're all playing in that way, when they're sharing the ball, when they're not just taking an open shot, they're taking the better shot, when they're getting each other involved in the offense, and when they're moving together collectively as a defense. It's not up to one individual just to lock down. They all have to play their part. And they're conscious of what's going on, where their ball is moving, so they can step in, they can double team at the right time, hang out in the paint when they need to. So overall, I think their identity is just being a team, right? Like a lot of these teams have superstars and their guys are there because you've got to play 5-on-5. The Kings play all those 5 guys every time. They're all active. And when they rotate their starters and for bench players, 6, 7, 8 men deep, they step right in and it's not an issue. They don't, drop off significantly. If anything, sometimes they've built leads. I continue to believe Malik Monk is the key to their success in terms of their energy and be able to keep those leads and or come through when they're down and infuse that team with reminders of what makes them, have the record that they have, makes them confident, makes them feel good, makes them have success, and makes Mike Brown not have to call a timeout. So yeah, overall, it's each player plays a role. They're looking out for each other and they run. That is what I think their overall identity is.
Yeah. I feel like Giannis's next insult is going to be, you're only here because we have to play 5-on-5. Like that's the next thing he's going to say on Serge Ibaka's show.
The screen setter.
You're only here because we have to play 5-on-5. One stat it gets a stat regarding Domas and De'Aaron that we haven't brought up, and I think this is a Kenny Caraway special. De'Aaron Fox, 41 minutes.
Yes.
Domantas Sabonis, 40 minutes. We don't see them crack that 40-minute marker very often, and both of them did it last night in their massive performances in Toronto.
Yeah, man. Those guys went out and did what they had to do to bring home that victory. I loved it. I love seeing them play that much.
Yeah, and I think in those special situations where you're playing a team like Toronto, where they, it was going to be a bit of a fight. They weren't necessarily matched up great in terms of size and length. So you knew, and we got in that hole early on in terms of the deficit of in the score. So you knew that these guys were going to have to step up, but also because you weren't just playing a great team, you're playing against some terrible officiating. So it took more from those guys. The fact that De'Aaron Fox and Domas didn't, retreat. They didn't give up. They just kept going. I mean, obviously we got some technical calls, which I'm all in favor of. If that's what it takes to get you guys fired up to win one for Mike Brown, let's do this. But overall, the fact that they didn't give up and they kept going, knowing that they weren't getting the calls that they deserved, people are getting hacked. There's blood streaming down De'Aaron Fox's face. They were like, we're not losing this game. And if it takes us playing over 40 minutes, that's what's going to have to happen. And they didn't seem to drop off, right? Like they finished that game very strong. And, my whole thing with them skipping off the court, they skipped right into the locker room and celebrated with their head coach for the night. And it's just such a fun thing to see them celebrate that together and really win that game as a whole team.
Olivia, what is De'Aaron Fox supposed to do at this point? I mean, the guy's going, I think Matt George talked about it on his latest episode of Locked On. He's going to the line like 4 times a game. That's completely inexcusable for someone of his talent and someone that attacks as much as he does. We've been talking about it for years with De'Aaron Fox. Like, what is he supposed to do? Keep banging his head against the wall and trying to get to the line? Is that what it is? Because it doesn't feel like it's going to change. It doesn't feel like they're going to start giving him the respect that he deserves.
Yeah, I remember us talking about this last year, and it was twofold. One, like, why doesn't he get the calls, and when is he going to be an all-star? And both of my responses were the Kings have to win, and they're doing that now, right? But it's still pretty early in the season. Bottom line, it's unfair. You should just call the game. You see fouls, you call the game, you call the fouls, get him to the line. I think De'Aaron Fox's only recourse is to keep playing the way that he knows how to play, the way that he's most successful. And as the Kings continue to win, their visibility rate rises. They're on television more. We're talking about them more. National media is talking about them more. And maybe that results in them saying, like, by the way, De'Aaron Fox gets beat up quite a lot. He's a guy who's producing for this team, and he only gets to line 2 or 3 times a night. That doesn't make any sense. And I think as much as we like to say or think that the NBA is just like, this is organization, all is fair, we're going to review it. They're all humans, right? They're going to respond to the fact that fans and analysts are bringing this up. And sometimes it results in things changing. And I also think that that's what happens when a coach will get a technical. I mean, Steve Kerr did the same thing. Like, you're protecting your guys, you're trying to infuse some energy into them, but you're calling out stuff that's obvious. And then when that happens, I know that I've seen, I don't know if it happens enough for Kings games, but sometimes the referees will begin to look at the game a little bit differently, start making some makeup calls. You're like, that wasn't really a foul, but maybe you feel bad for missing that other one. But I don't know if there's definitely not one, cure all for all of this, other than I think De'Aaron Fox can't back down. And he hasn't thus far. Keep playing your game and call them out to the point that you can anyway. And you don't want to keep getting fined if you're within the organization. But, shows like this and national media and all those, the Kings will eventually get the recognition they deserve as a team. And when it comes to getting on the charity line.
I think that's obviously a big focal point today has been Mike Brown's technical, Mike Brown getting thrown out, and the team's reaction to Mike Brown getting thrown out. And Mike knowing it, because I absolutely am confident Mike knew this in that moment. De'Aaron got a technical foul like 2 days ago for I think De'Aaron's gotten a couple of technical fouls in recent days about going to officials. And you noted this earlier. Mike Brown's original approach at the start of the season didn't work. De'Aaron Fox sticking up for himself didn't work. All right, Mike Brown's going to try something else. It's pretty much the last, it's the last card he can play, and he can't play it again for a while. But it obviously, Olivia, proved to be very effective last night.
It did, and it's funny because, like, people talk about Mike Brown being so calm and reserved, and he got respect of his team where he doesn't have to scream at people to get them to do what he wants them to do to play within the system. And it reminds me of my dad. I talk about, like, my dad is the nicest man on the planet, and if anybody wants to argue with me, we can argue. But he's the nicest man.
I agree.
But as kids, and even as like young adults, my siblings and I, when my dad would get mad, he would just say, "I'm mad. I'm mad right now," and we'd be like, "What? That's not whatever, Dad. Okay." But then when he would really kind of like get angry, he never visibly got angry. He has the same chill, hippie kind of persona all the time. But one time there was like an issue, and he was mad at me, and he said, "This is the maddest I've ever been." Same voice, same man. I'm like, "This is the maddest you've ever been?" But because he used those words, it made me want to be better. I didn't need to get yelled at. I didn't need to get like reprimanded. It was just like the disappointment that he shared with me. I was like, "Oh man, I want to do better for my dad. I got to step it up." And I feel like that's like Mike Brown had to go off at that point. Like Damian said, like he had been nice. We're having these conversations on the sideline. Like last resort is fine. If I have to get a technical for you to understand the magnitude of the injustice we are seeing game after game, night after night, throw me out then. But generally, we see him being the kind of coach that I think my dad has been to me and his other children. Very chill, very thoughtful, and the players have clearly responded to that. You see Domas coaching Keegan on the court, and Keegan's receiving it. Like, you see the conversations happening. They're all trying to be better for one another, and they're mimicking the way that Coach Mike Brown is coaching them, in my mind. Of course, I don't know what's happening in the practices. Maybe James Ham could give us some insight, but he just seems like that kind of coach, and they've responded wonderfully. But I do think that De'Aaron Fox has to continue to play his game, because you don't want the refs to take you out of yours. And that's why I think it's so important that the Kings continue to play as a cohesive unit and not rely just on one person, because if we're all just kind of watching, De'Aaron Fox is not getting to the line, he's getting hacked, then what are we doing? How are we making up these points? But yeah, I like Mike Brown's style, and I like that it was a last resort type of thing last night. You can tell that he didn't really want to do it, but like, you brought me to this point. I was like, oh my goodness, it's like my dad saying, "I'm the maddest I've ever been." That was Mike Brown running onto the court. That was the equivalent for me. But yeah, I like it.
When I look at, I grab pictures from our services after the games to use for YouTube and social media and all this stuff. You can find pictures of Mike Brown talking to officials. And in virtually all of them, and this is a bit of a visual bit, so for those on the radio, my sincerest apologies, but he's in a position like, "Hey, I'm approaching you in just this very calm way. Yeah. Tell me how to get a foul." Like he in the just the most like I am non-threatening. I'm not angry. I just help me understand. Like, you could find 10 pictures of him in that position, talking to officials, and it's amazing. Yeah. Couldn't find him last night.
Not last
Couldn't
night.
find him last night.
Like this.
You could find him in the Philly game. A lot of them in the Philly game. You couldn't find him last night.
It's funny because I went back and watched that moment, and the foul was called on Harrison Barnes or whoever, and immediately after the foul is called, Mike just puts his hands in his pockets and just stands there. And you can see he's just kind of stewing, and he's like, "I really want to say something, but I don't want to get thrown out." And then there was the moment when he just said, "F it.
It's time."
I'm about to go off. I loved it though. I loved it.
He knew what was going to happen. Like it was, I'm sure he didn't expect the 7-point swing that happened in that moment, or 5-point swing or whatever it was, but the guys responded. Hell, they were damn near conditioned for it because of what happened the previous night in Philadelphia. That game was so slow because of the foul calls that, Olivia, you had just said, don't let the officials take you out of the game. Don't let the officials take you out of the way that you want to play. You could argue, Joel Embiid played a factor in this too, that happened the night before with officials, and they were almost battle tested by the time they got to Toronto. And when they didn't go to the foul line for an entire quarter, they realized, okay, all right, we're doing this again.
Yeah, well, and then the other thing about the previous games, it's the style that those other teams played, right? They're slowly walking it up, they're getting into their set offense, and it's difficult sometimes if you're a running team like the Kings to play the way that you want to play if the other team is so much slower and getting the ball down. And also, of course, is when you're not getting fouls called on you, only against you. That's slowing the game down. So it's difficult for them it was difficult for the Kings again to get into a good rhythm, to play the way that they like to play. But that's the thing. Teams aren't going to be like, oh, how would you like to play? You want to run? Okay, we'll run with you. Like, no, you have to make them play your game and stay within your game as best you can. And obviously there are things you can't control, like the whistle, but you can get the ball out of the net or, as quickly as you can and get started into your offense, because that just puts all of your players, all of the guys play better. I don't know anybody who plays best when we're walking it up the court, when we're in our set offense. It just makes more sense to keep the ball moving. And it's again, as difficult as that is, when you have things that are beyond your control with how many times the ball or a foul is being called or traveling and the blocking versus charging. Like, I just felt like there were so many, and that could really mess with people, mess with their rhythm. But I think the Kings did a great job last night combating, again, a really great team and terrible officiating.
I want to mention this real quick. Nick Wagner just tweeted that Elijah Mitchell's officially out for the year. Rumors they're going to sign Fred VanVleet after seeing what he did to De'Aaron Fox on that final possession. Good chance Fred VanVleet's playing for the San Francisco 49ers. He can really dip his shoulder and run through a player.
After what I saw last night, he'd be really good.
That was wild. And to think, like, if there were a couple more seconds on the clock, like,
oh man,
what would have happened? Like, we just see that happen and like, oh well, just get up and run another play. It was that was insane. That was insane.
I just realized I want to see the last 2-minute report.
It said it was a foul on when he shoved it.
It's already out.
Yeah.
Okay, so they missed. So they've already acknowledged they missed that.
Yeah. I wonder, was the one where he got busted open? Was that in the last 2 minutes? I think that was like under 2 minutes. Should have been a foul there. Busted open. But so now there's a little. I could say there's a little less angst with all of us because they got that win last night.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario. I mean, we talked about it on the J Street Vibes. It would be a little bit of a downer if they lost to Detroit. Detroit has the worst record in the game right now. But look, man, just big picture, 2-4. It's okay. It's an okay 6-game road trip. Worst case scenario. Where were you at after the 2 games with New York and Philly? Because it seemed like a lot of people were like, oh no, here we go again. This team is no good. Did you ever panic in that way after seeing those 2 games?
No, and I'm a panicker. We already know that I'm like, oh my God, you guys, don't get into these ruts. Sorry for people on the radio like, oh my God, that voice. But I didn't panic this time. I feel like it's odd to me that it's so hard to win on the road. Every team, every league, everybody wants home court advantage. They're playing the same game everywhere, right? Nothing really changes except, the crowd and the colors and the audience, that kind of thing. But it's so odd to me that it's so difficult to win. And when you're able to be a team that wins well, wins a lot of games on the road, you're praised because like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. But it's clearly a mental thing, right? I've heard people talk about like, oh, they get to sleep in their own beds and wake up to their own alarm clock or whatever. I don't know. But prior to COVID, I used to travel for work a ton and I loved it. It was like, go to New York and go to Seattle, then go back down to Austin, come to DC. And it was like, people were paying me to visit my friends essentially and do work. But one thing that I think might be the reason why it's so hard, not really the reason, but I'm like, maybe it's just the pooping. Because when you travel, it takes a couple days for your body to stay right, So that's why they were lethargic. That's why they weren't moving. Your pooping is off. Your bowels are like, I don't know this hotel. This water, it tastes gross. This hotel food, I'm not doing this for you. And then by the 3rd day, it's like, all right, I surrender. And then they play well. That's the only logic I have for it. I don't know why it is otherwise so difficult to play on the road.
Well, what about the last day of the road trip being a tough game? Shouldn't you be acclimated by then?
They should. The challenge with basketball is you're like with the Kings, they're going from city to city, right? So the time change is different. But I feel like once your bowels know that you're not going to be home for a while, and it takes like 3 days, your bowels are like, no, maybe we'll go home tomorrow, or maybe the next day. And they're like, no, we're going to be on the okay, fine. So now that they're going to Detroit, they should be fine. We should see them running. We should see them active. We should see a number of the assist line go up. That's what I'm hoping for.
I don't know how to follow that. So I guess we're close enough to the end to just call it a day at that point. I think I'm right. No one can ever say Olivia's recycling talking points. That's a new one.
Am I wrong, though? You've traveled. Doesn't it take a couple days?
I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong. I don't think that has anything to do with them going 9 of 21 from beyond the arc.
Well, I know.
Well, let's look at the games before last night. They weren't playing the way that they play, right? The lack of ball movement, they were stagnant. It's because they weren't comfortable. They weren't comfortable. So, I mean, I know there are many times when I used to travel, again, like a ton, I'd have to talk. I'm like, you know what? I know you don't know this toilet, but this toilet can be your friend. Let's work together. You have to eat more vegetables than you typically do, drink enough water, all those things. But it's about being holistic. And it takes a couple of days for that relationship to be trusted. And then they feel good again.
That's Olivia Christian.
You rock, Maybach. Oh, you rock.
I speak facts, yo. I speak facts. And I'm on medication.
Well, this is odd.
The face that Demon has right now is the face that he typically has when KC is doing his Drake bars. He's just like, I don't know. Don't sing. I won't sing.
It's usually the singing that gets him there.
I'm so happy that our friends at Sac State are listening at this exact moment because Coach David Patrick joins us next. Oh, thank you as always. The game last night, Cap, across all the social media platforms. Make sure you check it out.